Hey everyone, my name is Dan Atkins. I co-founded this little organization some time ago with Sean and Glenn over here, and now we have 6 members on the board, and Lizzie and Graham, as you probably saw this morning, are 2 of those members, and they're the ones that you have to thank for putting this fine program together. Just a couple of quick things I'll mention. We have the People Analytics Conference, which you're not seeing now, but if we're interested in getting people driven to that, so let your colleagues know, especially the people that work in that space, because they might not know it. We're doing IoT, same thing applies there, Internet of Things. That'll be March and April respectively. We might do a Data Tech Day again, June 7th. We did one of those last June, very successful. Part of MinneAnalytics' mission statement, which is literally we'll make it up as we go along, currently exists in a number of things, but it has to do with the education, making analytics accessible and allowing more people to experience it. Part of that is having an event where all of you can learn from people like these fine gentlemen up here. We're also interested in creating a mentorship program. We're active on that. Mark Gorman's in the room. Raise your hand, Mark. I saw him walk in. Oh, anyway, Josh. But anyway, so if you want to be a mentor for a college student, we're interested in doing that. We also want to facilitate internships. There's this great Minnesota undergraduate analytics competition with 25 different schools coming up in April. These kids come in and compete for a weekend. It's incredible stuff. They need judges. We want to continue that. But part of that vein is we've been consulted with College of Science and Engineering at the U, Carlson, University of St. Thomas, and many others. One of them is Capella. And in that, I guess you'd call it consultation and focus groups. Shep here introduced me to what they're doing in an angle that we hadn't quite considered yet, but he could tell you more about that. But they're attempting to identify the analytics gap that exists not necessarily in the college, but more in the enterprise level and in the corporate level. So I'm going to turn it right over to Shep Parke from Capella.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. Right after mashed potatoes, right? That was my favorite. It really was. Yeah, thank you, Dan. This is a topic that I've worked on for probably 30 years. And I started selling toilet paper for Procter & Gamble. And then now I'm ending up later in my career working with an amazing company that has figured out how professionals learn and how professionals advance their career. So we're not going to talk a lot about that. What we are going to talk about is something that I've experienced, and these 2 gentlemen have as well, which is and I've heard it in almost every discussion for this morning and frankly for the last year as we've gone through this journey, and that is we've got more than enough data, we've got more than enough technical capability, ever more. So what's the big deal, right? And I heard in Rebecca's talk, she talked about how do you get, or someone asked the question, how do you get data people and strategy people in the same room, right? So the topic is this notion of we think of it as framing opportunities, but it's really why is it so hard sometimes for the business people, the business teams, and the technical and analytic teams? What's so hard? And we've coined that the business analytic gap. And just to flavor it a bit, McKinsey's been looking at this for a decade. There's a material gap in data science, right? There's a huge need for data science skills and ever more. And they pegged that last year for the next 5 at 200,000 roles in the United States, 200,000 that are unfilled right now and very hard to fill. But then they look at the business side of it, and it's 10x. It's 2 million. 2 million business. Think of it as I think of it as leaders, but it's those of the people that have responsibility for functions, for business units, for teams, right? And the gap that they identified is the lack of comfort, competence in in even talking about analytics. So this room is an analytic professional room, I believe, and we're grateful to have this discussion. The purpose of this panel, though, is to I want to introduce, you obviously know Scott Brinker now from the keynote, but Steve Wallin from the U.S. Bank. Both of these men have spent a lot of years working around how to grow businesses by both MarTech and analytics. And so we've kind of done this already, but I'd love to start with Steve because I'm so grateful to begin to work with you over the last several months. And he's got a great pedigree. He started teaching math in high school, which is pretty cool. But he's now running an analytics group at US Bank, and I'd love for him to introduce himself. And then Scott, what was fascinating at lunch was, is the question business technology gap, which has always been the case, or is analytics now a third sphere, right, of the different language, the different thinking? Are there three or two? So we're going to talk about some of that, but we're going to quickly open it up. So if you all would like to ask questions of these guys that do this for a living, let's learn together. Make sense? Okay. So Steve, do you mind just sharing a little bit about, your history and kind of what you're doing now? Because it's fascinating.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm Steve Wallin. Yes, I started as a high school teacher, and then I moved off into software. And I had the fortune of working with a software company that allowed me to start using data to make decisions and start building and launching things. So my passion, my background really is building and launching new programs, scaling them, but I've always done it around data. And after I left the software company, I went to Best Buy and eventually became a part of the consumer insights unit there. And one of the things that our leader at the time was Bill Hoffman, who I'm also working with now, had a real penchant for insights to action. That was always his mantra, always what he was driving for. And at that time instilled a model of having what we called insight strategists. And that's the role I'm playing at US Bank now, which is, it's one thing to have insights, but if insights don't go anywhere, it doesn't leave you any further ahead than you were to begin with. He always referred to that as the power plants are up, but the lines are down. And so we've got great pockets of data in organizations, and it's not just retail, it's not just banking, it's every industry, I believe, because the most common thing I hear people say is, we've got all this great data, but why aren't we using it? And there are people in the analytics space that go, we're trying to use it, we're telling you what you need to do, and so that's the role I'm playing now at US Bank. That's and previous to that, Bill and I actually started our own company and focused on really helping organizations drive insights to action. But it is a very, very complex thing. It's hard to drive insight to action. It's much easier to get the reports out and be able to build dashboards, which everyone seems to love, and to be able to say, I'll have this report out every Tuesday. The next thing you know, you've got 40 different reports, some of it contradicting, and so it's all about how do we get this refined and really pushing forward. And I still think the world of analytics is just an infant right now, but more and more organizations, we were talking about this at lunch, and I thought it was really true in retail, is instincts used to be what you needed. Good instincts would get you, would get growth for your organization. But now that the competitive landscape, the commoditization, the speed of which things commoditize, especially in retail, but the disruption that's happening so rapidly forces the longer standing companies to become precise. And you can't drive precision without data. And so one of the things we're talking about is people tend to say, well, I know what my instincts are telling me, so I'm just going to find some data that'll support that. And can everyone please keep giving me reports until I'm going, yes, that's what it is. And those that are going to survive are going to be the companies that actually become data-driven.
It's fascinating. And Scott, as you did your keynote, you are marketing and technology coming together, right? Marketing and software, right? And then Rebecca talked about data and is it software, but where does analytics fit in the marketing technology stack?
Yeah, actually, your remark about being data-driven, I shared that joke with you over lunch, that data-driven does not mean driving around looking for the data that supports your conclusion. I have to clarify that sometimes. Whether or not analytics is different from the technology side, it's interesting. I think they are different, but I think there's a lot of parallels to the challenges. So my background being, the world of marketing and IT, which used to be diametrically opposed, marketing didn't even understand the language of IT. I mean, they knew they needed IT, but the interface between them was incredibly primitive and a lot of misunderstanding. And one of the ways in which we've seen that solved here over the past several years are these emergence of these hybrid roles. You know, whether they officially work in IT or officially work in marketing almost doesn't matter, but it's this idea of having technology savvy people who have a technical background, but they have enough of a passion and an interest in marketing that they can embed in marketing. They can actually help day to day with that translation of how will technology, how can be effectively applied to marketing. And so it sounds like there's a lot of parallels to, yeah, these inside analyst roles in analytics of, you know, it's not just a on-demand service that, you know, you throw something over the wall, analyze this, send me something back, but, you know, they're literally in the trenches on a day-to-day basis. I think that everywhere I've seen that on the tech side, it's been incredibly productive. Sorry, Lord.
No, yeah. We'll finish soon, right? So here's a question, right? And it's really for the room, but for you guys, right? Which is more important? The business side or the technology side? The business side or the analytics side? Should the business people learn about analytics and be able to model? Should the analytics people become strategists? What do you think, Steve?
Yes.
Oh, good. All both.
So
We'll be busy for a while, right?
I think my point of view about successful analytics and how do you bridge that gap between the business decisions that need to be made based off of good analytics. How do you bring that together from the analyst to the business team? Part of that starts with common language, but I'm always looking at it from how do we get our analytics team closer, and how do we pull in that business team? But the most successful analysts that I continue to come across have one characteristic that really stands out to me, and that is they're willing to have a point of view. And they believe it's their responsibility to have a point of view. Now, that sounds simple, but having a point of view is really, really risky. Because if you don't have a point of view, you can just say, well, I'm objective. You asked for this data, I gave it to you. If you don't like what you got, it's your fault. I gave you exactly what you asked for. Having a point of view means I might challenge you on what you're asking for because what I'm hearing is your problem isn't what I'm hearing and what you're asking for. And so I have to start investigating. And then if I'm going to have a point of view, I'm going to have to be really, really sure about the opportunity you're trying to solve for. Because if I don't have that scoped right, it doesn't matter how smart I am. It doesn't matter how well I use SAS. It doesn't matter how beautiful the PowerPoint presentation is. If I've got that step wrong, if we're not actually aligned on what you're asking for and what you need and the path we're heading down, none of the rest matters. And so once you're aligned on that, then you've also got to be brave enough to say, I know the data we need to pull. I know other things that are going on in the organization and other pockets where I need to probably just do some cross-checking. And then I've got to tell a compelling story. Now, doing those things, one, is difficult, and I think it's really difficult to find people who can do that consistently. That's where the more complex the problem, the more likely they're going to go to find that one person who they really trust. And the rest of your analytics team is going, how come I don't get to work on the cool projects or the complex projects, and how come they always want, how come they always want Bob when I'm available and Bob's way overworked? That's because Bob's got those steps that get you to the place you want to be. And so the idea of having the bravery to have a point of view is one of the most difficult things to overcome. And sometimes it's leaders' fault. It's not the analyst's fault because they're not getting the air cover to take risk. So you have to have those things working in concert. And, at times you're going to be wrong. But if you can get to a point where you're willing to stick your neck out and you're willing to actually bring insights that people don't already know. It's the one thing I have an issue with in the analytics space is when we get too much into reporting. And it's the same report over and over. And everyone kind of looks at it, and all they're doing is saying, is there anything that surprises me? No, there isn't. Okay, I won't worry about it. Those are, one, boring for the analyst to work on, but they're safe. They're safe for the business to read. But to get to those points where you make somebody get the aha, to me, that's the challenge, and that's that's where I see analysts succeed or fail. But the ones that really stand out are the ones that have the ability to have a point of view and the background and the knowledge to make it right when they make a statement.
And is that a business side point of view or an analytic point of view?
Well, to me, it's about, I've got a point of view of how you need to grow your business.
Okay. So Scott, when you guys, and you do the ION is just, I went and looked, there's some really amazing work that your teams do.
Thank you. I'll give you that $20.
Yeah, you can buy mashed potatoes. Anyway, the question is, I'm headed to this, is it important for people to, come with, the degrees and the experience, or can you build them? And how do you balance that, right? How do you think about, are you hiring, Top Gun people, or can you build them?
Yeah, wow, great question. So it's a little bit of both. I think in this landscape where things are changing so rapidly, you can't hire for knowledge. There's just way more knowledge in this space than any one person can hold, and also just the relevance of which knowledge is most valuable to your business is going to change and very rapidly. I think what you can hire for, though, is this set of talent, and in particular this talent around things like the ability to be analytical, the ability to tell stories, the ability to, the interest to learn, right? We all know we face change. We all know that change is hard, but there's a continuum, of people who are more interested in that and less so. And certainly when you get into a marketing technology role, you kind of have to have a bias for wanting to learn what's happening is new, but you've got to balance that with respect for, okay, what's relevant to the business? What's going to affect the business? How do you see both? Those people are very hard to, this is why there's this gap in hiring people in data science. It's,
right.
I think very analogous is finding people who both have that depth of understanding and interest in what the technology is enabling, but the perspective to stand back and say, okay, here's how this is relevant to the business, and here's how I can actually translate it to the business. They're rare. So looking for that more than any, I don't care what degree you have. I care even less about, where did you work before? It's what did you do before where you were working?
That's a good point.
An old mentor of mine used to say, I hire for 3 things and only 3 things, and that was curiosity, ethics, and drive. And when I think about that in the analytics space, I think that's really, really spot on. I think the more, and that doesn't, and I don't even just mean in data analytics, I'm talking, insights in general, I think business teams in general, the curiosity, that is the thing. When we talk about having a point of view, that usually starts somewhere with that curiosity. It's like, I love working with the people that are like, I got to show you something. I was thinking about this, and I pulled this, and take a look. And that's where all of a sudden it starts with a, take a look at this 1 second, and the next thing you know, you're off and running on something where everyone's going, are you sure that's right? Are you sure? Because if that's right, that's going to blow people's minds. Those are the moments that you wait for and try to get to, and I think those 3 things, help you get there.
So in this room, how many of you are consider yourselves on the business side versus the analytics side, and do you even think that way in your role? Business side. Yeah. All right, analytics side. Yeah. So does it matter? You think it does? Really? Can you say? We need to put a mic out there, right? No, seriously. I'd love to hear. Yeah. Yeah. How so?
I'll play.
Great. Thank you. No. We're grateful for you. Yeah. Come on.
My mouth. Yeah, really.
Yeah. There'll be more.
Nobody else is going to say a word.
Yeah.
I'm on both sides.
Okay. So what? How?
Well, I'm a marketing technologist. That's
Okay.
my title.
Yep.
And when I come in with a client, I first come in and analyze their business objectives, and we determine what their marketing strategies are and how we're going to go about them. And then the very first technology that I implement is the data analytics, and how are we going to identify the ROI of everything that we do, and what tracking mechanisms do we have in place. And I'm the data analyst to identify what's working and what's not working. So it's my job. My tagline is what gets measured gets managed. And I think that in and of itself identifies the blend between the business and the marketing side. That's my job.
Are you an independent provider too?
I am.
Okay, great, and that's awesome, right? And the question is, for those that are inside the business, is where you may help them, right? Is, when you interact with a team, right? Do you interact with a person? Do you interact with both sides?
I interact with both sides. Well, it depends on the size of the company. In
Right.
some instances, I'm the team.
Right. Amen. Yeah, I get it. That's
So it
fascinating.
depends.
So I guess that what we've seen, certainly I have for many years, but in this last year, is we've started to really talk with teams about this in businesses, is that that there's a gap, but there's also a real hunger to address it. And so I'm just interested. Some of you have been in our focus groups, so we're grateful for that, right? But we think it's really important, and I'm just interested in your point of view, right? What are you seeing in your businesses? Is this real? Who would like to address that? Yes, sir.
So I really appreciate this discussion, especially Steve, your comments, because I think it really summarizes well
Thank you.
The challenges that my team and I are facing right now. Really, the challenge is to move up the value chain from just providing reports and providing data that the business consumes to actually taking the time to dig in to the vast data that we have access to and seeing what's really going on and coming to the business with new answers to questions they didn't even think to ask, right? So I think that part of it is a paradigm that's been established that the business is the consumer of what analytics provides. They provide the direction. They know what questions to ask. But I think we've gotten to a situation now where if you're not close enough to the data, you don't even know what questions it's possible to ask. You don't even know what patterns or opportunities you could uncover. And so I think that's part of the source of this gap, is shifting that paradigm, as you've described, from being a provider of reports and an analytics department that feeds the business to being a strategic partner that helps the business understand what the biggest opportunities are.
What's your sense on what you just described, right? That becoming more productive or strategic, right? Mm-hmm. How do you build that skill?
I think that, how do you build the skill of, so I think when you look at it on sort of if you think about Covey's 2x2 urgency matrix, right? That kind of exploratory work is never urgent, but it's really important. And so you have to ensure that the business is willing to invest the resources and the time it takes to do that work without understanding what the deliverable is. So in terms of a skill, how do you develop the skill of exploring and finding those answers? I do think that does require having a foot in both worlds, right? Yeah. Understanding what will be helpful to the business so that you don't go down a rabbit hole and uncover something that's academically interesting, but not terribly useful. So it's the data science skill set, plus it's the close connection to the business that sensitizes you to what will actually be valuable.
Yeah.
I think there's an important point in what you were talking about, that transition from the reporting analytics team to the team that actually is doing analysis on a more regular basis. That transition is extremely difficult, and part of the reason is it's a slow process, and I think it's kind of viral, but basically you have to earn the right to carve out some time to do analysis, and it seems ludicrous to say that. But when you can provide everybody all the last minute things that they want, meaning, hey, we're getting pressure from our CFO, we've got to grow revenue, we've got to make sure margins improve, the attach on this is going down, we got to turn it around now, I need this. Oh, and you give a report and it turns into, one question turns into 20, and the next thing you know, you're spending 12 days on the same problem. But if you can respond in a consistent way where they're going, that team is there for me, and I know I've been kind of hammering away at them, but they're always there when I ask them a question. it starts to buy you a little bit of credibility to say, let me bring you something you haven't asked for. And it usually starts with somebody came up with something based on the data. You found 10% of time to carve out, and you've been kind of banging around on something. I think it's actually great for leadership meetings to take like some sort of vexing problem that no one has asked about yet. I think it's way better than round robin updates from everybody about what they're working on. I think it, carve it out and say, look, we've been looking at attrition and something's not right here, and what's causing this, and is there an aha there? And actually make your team meetings more about that and solving something, and you can see how people are thinking and putting the problem together. But once you can come up with one of those ahas, that's when it starts to become viral, because one leader says, where did you get that from? It might be something that you think is fairly simple and that everyone knows, but they don't know. And they go, well, if I would have known that, I wouldn't be doing this. And once that happens once, somebody says, well, where did that come from? Oh, that came from our analytics team. I talked to Cindy, and she gave me this, and they're like, well, I want that. And can you analyze my business the same way you did theirs, and give me some element of that? And the next thing you know, they're offering to provide resources to you to get more of that. But that journey is that might be 2 years. It's a very, very arduous process.
It's fascinating, right? Listening to both of you. Scott, this may be a little bit off the wall, but you've got, and I think you'll have one too, Steve. I know you've got 3 or 4, but I love the stories, right? Those moments when, something like that happened. Can you think of one, Scott? I've been enthralled by what you guys do, and, where you guys, where your team, one of your teams created, a real breakthrough.
Well, I think it's funny. The story I have in mind is actually more of just what we were talking about. Is in the marketing technology space, there's this question of whether or not having a service bureau type model is even the best way to get there from here. That basically, if there's this thing where you have to throw something over the wall to someone, you have to invoke it. And then when you invoke it, stuff happens, and there's opportunities for collaboration and that can open doors. But generally, people are invoking you when they need something, and to the degree that they think of you, they're not prepared for having you come from outside of a direct need that they have. It's a little bit of a barrier versus, and this is the kind of relationship that we saw with marketing and IT for years. And so marketing would ask IT for something, and it would get into a queue, and it would take longer than marketing would have wanted it to. And what started to happen when you had these marketing technologists that embedded in the marketing team is it started to shift from that, sort of, sporadic model of, okay, here's an invoking of a request for this, to something that became more ambient. It was just part of these discussions, because I find so many of these discussions in the marketing tech space, people don't even necessarily start out with a formal question. It's that they're having a discussion just around, a meeting on some other thing, and someone's asking hey, I wonder if this is that, and if you've got someone in the room who picks up on those signals and can say, actually, there's a technology piece to this, or there's a way we could actually use analytics to get this answer, that's an opportunity to jump right in. But you kind of have to be there, because if you aren't, the people having that discussion don't even necessarily realize that was one of those moments that you could have come to their aid.
Yep.
So I don't know. I know we had a lot of these challenges in the marketing tech world. It's one thing to theoretically have marketing technologists embed. It's been at least 5 or 6 years here of this slow journey before marketing teams actually started to embed some of that talent. So with the analytics world, you tell me where the journey is.
But what you just said, let me see if I heard it right, because I get the tech part, right, and that's what you've been focused on. But then you said analytics. Is analytics at the table with you now? In that story? Yeah, you.
It depends on the customer. Most of them no.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to pull out, right? So will it be? Because I asked you this before, that amazing chart, right? Y'all remember it?
So it's interesting.
3,000 companies on it.
One other related thing. I get asked a lot on the technology side. Oh, you're saying every marketer should become a technologist?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I mean, it's a very specialized skill set. But it's interesting. I am saying, actually, almost every marketer needs to be tech savvy, needs to be tech comfortable, needs to learn enough of this language to have discussions and understand where the technology specialists fit. Sometimes an example I use, it's not a perfect analogy, but a lot of marketing teams get it, is not every marketer is a great graphic designer. In fact, most of them suck. They all have opinions on graphic design. Same thing applies to technology and analytics, I'm sure. But it's interesting. I mean, most marketers have no fear around the embedding of graphic design in the organization, how they leverage in projects, how it's a part. It's become part of the culture. And I think that's where we're trying to get with technology, and I suspect with analytics is you need enough of that sort of ambient comfort level that everyone who is in marketing understands enough about analytics to know what they know and, more importantly, what they don't know to, when they have to bring an expert in.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Steve, as you landed in the bank, 6 months ago? 6, 8?
Yeah,
8,
10.
9 months? Yeah, okay, so years gone by, right?
Yeah.
When you looked at the mix of your team, just reflecting on this, right, is your team mostly technical? Is it at all business? How analytic is it?
It's almost all on the technical side. I would say that there is a mix of folks who have that are perhaps more business-minded. There's quite a few with fairly rich history with the bank, which within banking and especially all the compliance, that's really, really important to have a depth of understanding and a mix of that. And you really have to, we were careful to say when we were first coming into the bank, we have to preserve some of that history because you can't just start over and say, well, geez, we're gonna upgrade everything, and then all of a sudden you don't have all of that knowledge that's resided there over the years. And so, how do you have a mix of that? And I think to the question of, do you train it? Do you build it? Do you hire for it?
Right.
If you're going to go out to hire all the people who have all the skill sets to close the gap between business and analytics, you're not going to have budget left to do anything else because of how expensive it's going to be to find those people, if you can find them, enough to staff your group. The other thing is you're going to have massive problems in employee engagement after a while because if they all have that skill set, they all want to be working on the complex projects, and we know there's not enough of those really interesting projects to go around. So how do you have it where you have a good mix of incoming talent that's junior, that wants to work on the basic stuff because they want to learn, they want to start understanding the organization, but you've also got those people that can act as mentors and they can mix their time between helping people along in the process and working with more senior leaders across the organization. So in reference to your other question when you were talking about specific stories or examples, I think one of the things that I've seen in a few organizations now that I think is one of those where an analytics team could take this and run with it, which is something simple like attrition. Everyone's worried about what is customer attrition? What does it look like? Why is it happening? Usually it is, tell me how much customer attrition we've had. Okay, it's 30% in the last year. So what? And it was 32% the year before and 28% the year before that. That's where I go, who cares? Now someone's going to go, well, I care because I'm responsible for managing this customer set. But that doesn't tell you what to do. There's no difference behind knowing that it was 32 or 28 and it's vacillated 4 percentage points over the last 6 years. What does anyone do with that? But in one of the things that we had done at Best Buy and something we're looking at currently is, so if I were to take a look at the value of those that left our organization and no longer are customers. And by the way, the fascinating stuff about all this and the reason why there's part of the gap is the language. So if I say attrition, how do you define that? They haven't shopped with you or bought anything for a week, a month, a year, 2 years? Are they kind of lapsed customers that we haven't seen them for a while, but we believe they still are customers? They drop their frequency, they drop their spend, they completely close an account, What is attrition? So if we're solving for attrition with a definition in our head that's different than the business, wasting time, complete waste of time. So you get aligned on what common language is. And then you say, okay, I can't act on just how much attrition there is. Now, if I know the attrition is rising, I can start investigating. It's like the thread, and I'm going to start pulling on the thread. But if I could look at it in terms of value and say, well, let's look at the value of the loss of each customer that we lost in the last year, once you've defined what it is. And if you would decile that and say, well, let's look at the value of the top decile and what does, like how much of the total loss does the top decile contribute? I think you'd be surprised. And then you would go, well, man, if we could just keep the top 10, I don't have to worry about the other 90. I can just, now I'm zeroing in on something. My top 10% of customers lost in terms of value loses substantially more than the other 90%, possibly. Maybe not. And if it's not, then, but those are the types of things where you go, I want to start with a stat, but now I'm going to start digging down levels to where I can pinpoint something that I'm going to be able to go to a business leader and say, based on what I'm seeing, I think you have an opportunity with. And if you start with that sentence, I guarantee business leaders are going to be, tell me more.
So was that analytics or was that business insight?
Yes.
What questions might the room have? Yes.
My question is, would that be a better use of your time?
Could you ask the question again?
Would that be a better use of your time?
Which part?
Like going through the data for the business
Ah.
and have the question.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm, you know, when I talk about that kind of 2-year process or the longer process to earn the right to be able to spend your time on that, that's the delicate balance of making sure that I'm not going to ignore business requests in order for me to start getting proactive. But how do I start carving out just a little bit more time to get into the proactive? And this is where I believe it's not about every single person on the team carving out time. I think that can be a really, really difficult thing to manage. It leads to chaos. Everybody's kind of working on their own thing. Plus then everyone gets really upset because they're saying, well, how come my idea isn't being listened to? But if you do it as a team, I think it's a good team building experience. It's a great way for leaders to better understand who has strength on the team to take something that is fairly ambiguous from the start, like attrition, and actually get down to something that's actionable. And so I might take, it doesn't have to be attrition, it could be growth, it could be anything, but take something and as a team say, let's go after this. I mean, as a team, just even having the conversation about what haven't we been asked about that we think we should solve for, that's a great team discussion. Just see how broad the answers are.
I'm from the healthcare sector, so in that you need somebody who has like a domain expertise in that area. So somebody who specializes in claims, like a data analyst focusing on claims. I'm from the IT side. I have the domain knowledge in claims, but I don't spend time knowing how many claims we had like 5 years ago and all that stuff. But what I can provide, right? So you have to know the different functions and their respective responsibilities, right? You provide the data and provide the data at the minimum or the lower form of granularity, so that person can be able to do the work. So if you have like a domain expertise in a certain area, then it's actually incumbent upon you to know more about that domain, and you can pre-do all your research for that domain so that if the business comes to you with a question, at least on the fly you can be able to answer something.
That's interesting,
Yep.
right? Self-service, we'll come back to that, right? Just kidding.
Oh,
I know,
those
I
are
know. We're gonna go
dangerous
there.
words, dangerous words.
I love that.
Fighting words.
Can we go?
Shadow analytics.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I guess I'd like to piggyback on that question, and given how much of an issue it is the down to system that we're talking about, really everything on a functional area and IT area, some pain don't have a rigorous analytical / statistical background and don't necessarily have the systems that have a
So this is where I think, you know, and this is what actually got Shep and I connected, is part of the issue is to say, like, that background is quite valuable. However, you can't just throw them now into interacting with a business team because they're going to be like, you can't even pull the data that I need. You know, how are you going to help me? I get that you understand my business, but now you don't have the rigor of the analytics side to actually be able to help. And so, you know, I think it takes both sides of that to be able to have a function that actually drives value on a consistent basis. And this is where I turned to, through a discussion, a friend of mine got connected with Shep on how do you take people who have different backgrounds but actually start driving some level of consistency of the output of your team. Because if the business team, if their opinion of you is completely based on their interaction with individuals, in which they say, well, they're a pretty good team as long as you work with Mike, but if you work with Tom, forget about it. So what that creates is lumpiness in your utilization of resources, and that becomes something that's a really maddening thing to try to tackle because everybody wants access to these 3 people, and you've got 4 other people who've got time on their hands. And so part of what we were talking about is most of the training when I go out and try to find it is technical, meaning get better versed in SaaS, get better versed in MicroStrategies, get better versed in Tableau, get better versed in whatever it is.
Please mention Domo.
And whatever the technology is. But it's always about how do I go take deep technical training. What I'm looking for is, like, I can always find technical training. That's really easy to send people to training for that. But I need to help people understand how to think. And that's where your experienced analysts can go, oh, well, you're not even starting in the right place. Like, you're on step 4 and you forgot about 1 through 3. Well, you know, maybe we should align on what the opportunity is we're even trying to solve for. Oh,
Helps a
yeah.
lot.
And we do it today. It's just that we go to step 4, 5, 6, then go back to 1 when nobody likes the answer or it's too confusing, and then we do step 1, 2, and 3. And it's so inefficient, and it's maddening, and it's irritating for the business teams.
Yes, ma'am.
So I would say that the part of that is people accept that there's different areas of marketing. Everybody's not branding, everybody's not marketing automation.
We're out of time.
But they lump analytics as like everybody is all the same.
Yep.
You know, you have people who are more IT integrated part of the analytics. You have people who are more on the statistical side of the analytics.
Yeah.
There are differentiations between the strengths and more general understanding that people have, and you need a combination of all those people to really be successful.
It's a benefit of the maturity of the marketing function, whereas the analytic function is still, like I said, it's in its infancy, really. People are just realizing now that they need it. And so it's like, oh, well, we have an analyst team, and that's it, right?
So Dan's here because we're out of time. And, that's all, okay, yes, sir. One last question.
To me, Steve,
Oh.
I think you asked.
Sorry, no, please.
Oh, Steve, I think you made a very good point, and that is the key is to seeing how people think. Now, I'm wondering if in your practices, if any of you go through and do any personality profiling on any of your prospective hires. I know for me as a marketing technologist that my core competency is that I am left-brained and right-brained. And I think that most people tend to lean towards one side or the other. So based on their predilection and how they think, isn't that going to determine then their ability to become an analyst to be a business person or a business person to become an analyst? It's really personality profiling.
Yeah, it's really important. The problem is what I see happening now is people do the personality test more as a kind of a team building thing. And we all do it, and we all go, oh, I'm a ENFP, and what are you? And then who cares, right? So
Precisely.
It's a poster outside my desk that everyone goes, oh, can you get me these answers right now? So
We will
I don't think
continue
we're
this
leveraging
outside,
it.
right? Yeah. Thank you guys very much.
Cool, thank you.
So before you guys leave, we have a couple of announcements. We have a couple of announcements. One, we still have some copies of this man's book. So the line was
They're on
longer
discount
early.
now.
They went from free to completely free. And so the line was longer earlier. Please get in line for that. We had our second speaker cancellation. The first one, apparently some guy named Larry Ellison called him into his office and he couldn't fly here. I don't understand why we're not a bigger priority than that. The second one had a sick child, but in room B at 2 o'clock, we're going to do an open discussion with the MinneAnalytics. So it's going to be the board of directors, the conference chairs from past and future conferences, talk about the community, maybe perhaps a little bit more about this and how we can all build. So that's the other update. Thank you.